These are live pictures from Atlanta where the late President Jimmy Carter is lying in repose at the Carter Center. 6 days of state funeral ceremonies celebrating his life began over the weekend. On Saturday, President Carter's motorcade made a brief stop at his childhood home before continuing on to Atlanta for a moment of silence at the state capitol. Tomorrow, his casket will be moved to Washington, where Carter will lie in state until Thursday ahead of his funeral ceremony at the National Cathedral. From there, he will return to his hometown of Plains, Georgia, for a private funeral and a burial alongside his late wife, Rosalind. And Mika, obviously, this is a family you knew so well. You would go over and play at the White House with Amy when you were 8, 9 years old. But you and your family remained close friends with the Carters throughout the years. And certainly my recollections of him while with you is what a lovely, wonderful man he was. And I may just add, what a patient man he was with your father.
Absolutely. This is almost to the end a man who was completely dedicated to service and to God. And he held his Bible studies up close to the end. And yes, I had talked to my dad a lot about their friendship and the friendships that were made in that presidency. And I've been reading my father's book over again, Power and Principle, which is basically his 4 years of working with former President Jimmy Carter and how Carter managed people, how they managed their friendship, and it often was intense, and at times they would go play tennis or go running, and Carter would completely leave him in the dust. He was in very good shape, very physically strong as president. And something that stood out just in terms of former President Carter's devotion to service and to God. In the book, my dad talks about Pope John Paul II when he visited the U.S., and Carter got to spend a few hours with him. And my father got to know Pope John Paul II and had tremendous respect for him, adored him. And Pope John Paul II said to my dad that when he spent time with Jimmy Carter, it was as if two religious leaders were conversing, not one. So, John Meacham, you write in a new piece, quote, Carter was a great and consequential life, a life devoted to the highest of American ideals, the fulfillment of the promise of the Declaration of Independence at home and abroad. Tell us more about his tremendous legacy.
Well, he's a remarkable American story to have come from the South, first Democratic president. He and Lyndon Johnson were these Democrats who came from the farthest reaches, when you think about it, of the Republic to rise to the pinnacle of power. And he did it in a meritocratic, that's a word there's been a lot of debate about it these days, but the mechanics of American democracy and society that were available to white men in that era were the means by which President Carter ascended. He went to public schools. He went to the Naval Academy. He served in uniform. He was in the state Senate. He was governor of Georgia just moments after, historically speaking, the civil rights movement, and comes out of nowhere, really. Makes the Iowa caucuses into the Iowa caucuses, and becomes president in a, by the way, to connect what we've been talking about, in a very narrow win over a man who then became his friend, Gerald Ford. Until he died, President Ford could name the 5 or 6 counties, he would put his hand up, that he had lost in southern Ohio, that he believes if he'd carried them, the result would have been different. I love politicians who can still name counties decades on. But President Carter had a remarkably global vision and a global understanding of what the implications of the Declaration of Independence were for someone who had come from segregated Georgia. And it's a sign that the world can and does change, not rapidly, but steadily, when there are people of goodwill, and Jimmy Carter was of goodwill. Did he get things wrong? Absolutely. Was he perfect? Absolutely not. Was he a saint? No. He was a sinner who managed to do some really remarkable things. And sinners who do remarkable things, seems to me, are more inspiring than saints do, because I don't know about you, but I know a lot more of the former than the latter.
Well, you know who else does? Jesus, like Peter. The sinner of all sinners, and denied him 3 times, and he said, Peter, you are the rock on which I am going to build my church. So thank God sinners have a shot at changing the world, and Jimmy Carter certainly did that. Jon Meacham, thank you so much, as always. Deeply grateful for you this morning. Richard Haass, first of all, an observation about Jimmy Carter that I noticed being around Dr. Brzezinski and President Carter at times. One is how different a leader Jimmy Carter was, and that he brokered dissent, active dissent. I have read through Dr. Brzezinski's memoirs, his diaries during the White House years, and at times you read it, Meek and I go, my God, how did Jimmy Carter keep Dr. Brzezinski in there? Because he was constantly pushing back and fighting him. In fact, in his office in Maine, he had a picture of Carter and him running and jogging, and Jimmy Carter's line was, Zabig, perhaps, that's it, that's the picture. Zabig, perhaps the one time that we were in step. You just don't see that anymore with presidents. They want it their way or the highway. But let's talk about Jimmy Carter for a second. Of course, his presidency remembered for Iran and the Iranian hostage crisis and miscalculations there. Let's talk about some other things briefly, because I'm fascinated that 1979 may be one of the more pivotal years in history, other than, say, 45 and 47 in recent American history. You had the Camp David Accords that ended a ground warfare for a generation in the Middle East. You had the normalization of China in early 79, which created the globalization era in which we live, for better or for worse. You had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and Carter's reaction, and more specifically, let's just say it, Dr. Brzezinski's reaction, not only that, but also to Poland. When Solidarity came up, he came up with a porcupine doctrine that would have made it too expensive for the Soviets to actually go in to Poland, as they had with Hungary and Czechoslovakia before that. And then you had the Polish Pope and the week that changed the world when the Polish Pope went there, went to Poland, the rise of solidarity. And really, you can go back to 1979. And the first cracks, really, in the wall of the Iron Curtain began in 1979 with a lot of the Carter administration's policies. That, of course, history, of course, has overshadowed that because of the Iranian hostage crisis. But I want you to do 2 things here, if you will, for our friends watching this morning. I want you to talk about the Carter legacy, successes, failures, and all that we just talked about here. But also, I want you to take that last piece, Iran, and how, ironically, now in Carter's death, you have Iran at the weakest state it has been in since that year, 1979.
So let's go back to 79. For me, it was an important year. It's the year I went to work for Jimmy Carter. I joined the Pentagon that year, among other things, working on Iran and Afghanistan, the 2 of the big events of that year. I actually think Jimmy Carter, all the talk about his post-presidency, Joe, as impressive as it was, is in some ways damning him with faint praise. It tends to underestimate the accomplishments of his presidency. You know, nuclear arms control agreements with the Soviet Union, the SALT II Accords. You mentioned the normalization. with China, Camp David, the Panama Canal Treaty, which gets criticized, but people who criticize it might want to keep in mind the fact that this canal has stayed open and operating, and we have had unlimited access at the same rates as everybody else ever since. We're not fighting a guerrilla war around the canal. So I actually think Jimmy Carter was a really interesting foreign policy person who, at one and the same time, was both an idealist and a realist. In some ways, if you think about him, he was the forerunner of Ronald Reagan. He put human rights front and center on the foreign policy agenda, but he was still willing to deal with regimes like China and the Soviet Union, which to me, what was impressive. And by the end, he was increasing American defense spending significantly. He understood that, yes, he was a man of peace, but he understood the world wasn't there. So, he went through the Camp David thing, but he jacked up American defense spending significantly. All of our military capabilities in the Middle East, what we now call Central Command, guess what? They had their origins in late 79, early 80 under Jimmy Carter and his Pentagon. So I actually think there's much more continuity between Carter and Reagan than anybody understands. And so I would give him a lot of credit for what he did. Coming back to Iran today, you're right. I actually think this is a remarkable moment. What the Biden administration is doing is handing off the Middle East to the incoming Trump administration, where there is more opportunity for progress than there has been in longer than a generation. And take Iran, which has been the principal problem directly and indirectly now for decades through its proxies. Given the loss in Syria, given that Hezbollah has been devastated, Hamas has been weakened, Israel can act militarily over Iran with impunity. What an opportunity for the United States to approach Iran and essentially say, look, we are done tolerating your support of proxies militarily. We are done allowing you to move ever closer to nuclear weapons. We are prepared to have an arrangement with you, a modus operandi, but only if you accept severe constraints on your foreign policy. If you're willing to do that, we could even talk about easing sanctions. But if you're not, we are prepared to use military force to make sure you do not get close to nuclear weapons and you cannot resume your military support of proxies. If there was ever a moment to introduce diplomacy backed by the threat of force, this is the moment. Donald Trump likes to think of himself as a deal maker. I actually think he has a serious opportunity here, Joe.
There really is, not only in Iran, as you said, but in Syria, across the Middle East. Expect a deal between the Saudis and Israel soon after Donald Trump gets into power. You're going to see countries that have been sworn enemies since 1948 actually moving together, and I think an acceleration perhaps of we have the Camp David Accords with Jimmy Carter, but the Abraham Accords with Donald Trump, and of course Jared Kushner running that in the first term. I think you're going to see an acceleration of that. Jonathan Mir,